All right, hi everybody. Um, so we're on to our third lesson of statistics so far. If you've noticed, the first two lessons were pretty much the same. They kind of just walked you through what three types of data gathering is taking place. Obviously, there's much more ways of gathering data than the three that are stated in those two sections, but those are the three that we talk about in this unit. Today is going to be kind of the same type of thing where we're not really going to do too much algebra. We do kind of in the warm up, but that's about it. And then we're just going to kind of talk through some problems. It's a lot of just note taking and me kind of telling you what the circumstance is and explaining it, and then you kind of doing homework problems that are kind of the same. Okay. A couple of things though that I want to make sure that I showed you, since you have to watch this video and you're kind of stuck and you can't fast forward. When you guys go to your calendar, let's see if I can find it. So your calendar has everything for you, and I'll continue to link this on Google Classroom. And then that way I don't have to link each individual assignment. Okay, everything can be found on here. It will be hyperlinked. So if you notice right now we're in week 3. Today's lesson will be lesson 153. You can see it's not hyperlinked because I'm creating the video right now, but as soon as I create it, it will be hyperlinked. Okay. When you click on your notes, your homework, your answer key, it's going to take you to everything that you need. So if you click on the notes, you'll see that, oops, hold on. If you click on the notes, you'll see that these are the notes that are coming out of the workbook today. Again, feel free to print them out or work on a separate sheet of paper. The homework right here, that is the homework out of the book, problems 1 through 10. And then the answer key, I'll kind of explain at the end, but I haven't yet in any video. This is just a link to the answer key that is posted in the back of the book. So I'll kind of just show you how to read through that, since we obviously haven't had to do that much. Okay. All right. Oops, that's not what I want to do. Let's go back to the lesson. There we go. Okay, I do have a calculator here. We will need it for the first couple of examples, so if you want to pause and get that out, that would be appreciated. I want to go through real quick just the homework from the previous night. So again, the 3 ways to gather data that I was talking about in the beginning. You have an observational study, which literally means that you are just watching. You're watching, you're observing. So think about it as like if you were sitting on a park bench watching the kids play at the park. Okay, all you're doing is watching. You're not interacting. You're not giving anything, any incentives or anything like that. You're just watching and writing stuff down or something like that, or just taking note. Okay, a survey and a sample survey are pretty much the same. Don't worry if you didn't write a sample survey here. Everything that we do for this unit will refer to a sample survey, which just means that it's usually just a smaller type of survey. But a survey just means that you are just asking questions and looking for feedback, whereas an experiment like science has to do with you typically giving incentives. Like, hey, if you fill this out, I'll give you, $100 gift card, something like that. An experiment has to do with interacting in 2 different groups, a control group and a non-control group. Okay, so moving on. Here's your warm-up, which is on page 193, which really doesn't mean much since you guys don't have your books. But again, you can print it out. I showed you where it was at, or write on a separate sheet of paper. Okay, minimize this a little bit. It says a new self-serve frozen yogurt shop has been asking customers to fill out a survey after they finish consuming their purchase, but before exiting. Okay, so after they finish, but before exiting. The following table shows the results of the exit survey. Use the data from the table to answer the questions that followed. I went through and I put in my totals in here. Move this over here. So for the statement, I enjoyed my frozen yogurt, there was 329 people that answered either strongly agree, disagree, agree, or strongly agree. I feel the price of my purchase was reasonable. There were 318 people who answered that question. I will recommend this establishment to others. There were 317 people who answered. So you can see that some people might have answered all 3, might have only answered 1 or 2, but obviously these numbers not being the same means some people answered 1 without the others. All right, and then how many people strongly disagreed versus disagree, agree, and strongly agree? 964 total responses. All right, this warm-up is actually pretty much the same as what you guys did in Math 1 and Math 2. It says determine the percentage of respondents. So we're looking at a percentage of respondents who agreed or strongly agreed with the first statement. Remember, or means that either of those could happen. So agreed or strongly agreed with the first statement, I enjoyed my frozen yogurt. So here's agreed and here's strongly agreed. So either of those responses, so if I add them together, 97 and 211 gives me 308 that responded either of those out of 329 responses. So notice I'm reading this way and that would be my total. So the percentage for that, let's see, so 308 divided by 329, so that's the most of the responses. So this would be about 93.62%. So I can round it 2 decimal places there. So notice I'm looking at the 5th decimal place. All right. The next one says what percentage of the respondents will not recommend the frozen yogurt shop to others. So I will recommend this establishment to others. I feel the person. Let's see what percentage will not recommend. So I will recommend this establishment. These people agree and strongly disagree are going to recommend, whereas these are not going to recommend. Okay, they're disagreeing. So that would be a total of 20 out of this entire row, which is 317 people who answered that question. So if I do 20 divided by 317, I get about 6.31% of people will not recommend. All right, if I scroll down a little bit, how many people, let's back over here, how many people responded to each statement? Did every person respond to all 3 statements? So let's see. The first row or the first statement, I enjoy my frozen yogurt, there were 329. The second statement, there were a total of 318. And then the third statement, there was 317. Did every person respond to all 3 statements? Explain how you know. The answer would be no, because there are different totals. So 329 people responded, 318 responded, 317 responded. Okay, and then the last question, is this data taken from a random sample? A random sample means that you're not targeting anybody in specific, meaning older people, younger people, boys versus girls, athletes versus non-athletes, people who have time versus who don't have time. And if you go back, it says that the shop has been asking customers to fill out a survey after they finish consuming their purchase, but before exiting. So they've taken the time to order, sit down, eat, and then they're asked a question before exiting. Or they walk in, they get their food, and right before exiting to take it home, they get asked their survey. So the answer to this question, is it a random sample, is it does not appear as such. It could be, it just doesn't appear that way. We don't need this anymore, so I'm going to get rid of it. Okay. It does not appear as such. By asking customers to give their feedback in the store, so only in the store, before they leave, they're catching people who have time. What about the people who carry out? So it doesn't really say anything about that, or if it has a drive-through or anything like that. But the most important thing is that people who have time. So imagine that you went in, got ice cream, sat down, ate, and then were asked a survey. Usually, once you're ready to go, you're ready to go, and you don't really want to stay there any longer to answer a survey. Maybe they could ask people while they're sitting there to take the survey, that type of thing. But again, it doesn't appear as such. All right. Moving on to example 1, so we're just going to go through each of the 4 examples. Example 1 says a study found that children in homes with vinyl flooring would be twice as likely to be diagnosed with autism. Vinyl flooring is like a fake type of wood flooring. It was usually like a cheaper option. Actually, now it's actually really good. In the last couple of years, vinyl flooring is actually really affordable and it's actually a really good option. But when this question was created, vinyl flooring was just a cheaper option and not necessarily nice, or as nice, I guess I should say. So anyways, children in homes with vinyl flooring would be twice as likely to be diagnosed with autism. What are some potential factors that could have affected the result of this survey? So review the given information for potential issues. So here's what this is looking for, and you're just going to want to write this down. Since there is no data, no chart, no graph associated with these findings, we have to assume that the results are accurate. So again, you don't want to read a question and assume that it's wrong. Okay, you can assume that it's accurate. You just want to question its validity or where it's coming from. One thing that we're going to talk about today is the idea that while statistics can be accurate, we always want to question because we can really represent data any way you want, and that's actually really true as we're working through this pandemic right now. You're probably seeing a lot of statistics on the news if you're watching the news or articles that you're reading, and it's not necessarily that they're wrong, but it's really you can skew data any way you want to represent it. Okay, so we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. Also, there's little information that may lead to bias, as this description does not supply us with evidence that this data is from an interview or survey. We will talk today about this word bias. The last example that we will talk about is bias versus unbiased results. Okay, so don't worry if you don't know that yet. All right, number 2 says evaluate how the results might have been impacted by external factors. Meaning, like, just because kids are twice as likely to get autism, it doesn't necessarily have to do with the vinyl flooring. What other factors could play into that? There are many factors that may have influenced these results, meaning the results that a child is twice as likely to have autism. One of them is how many areas were surveyed, like areas of homes and that type of thing, or regions right across the country. Is it like one little pocket of a city? Was this an area by a school for students with autism? Obviously, if this was right by a school specifically for kids with autism, then you're kind of targeting that demographic or those specific kids. So obviously it would be higher then. How many houses were looked at? So were there 5 that were looked at and 3 out of the 5 had children with autism? Were there 100? Were there 5,000? Were there 10,000? Was there a million? The more that you look at, the more accurate or reliable your statistic is. So that's one of the best questions, is you can always ask that, how many? And then last, is vinyl flooring better for students with autism? Meaning, like, has it been known that students with autism maybe have like a tactile touch preference, and vinyl floorings is a softer option than wood flooring? So then they put that in. Then a lot of those houses, that flooring was put in because it was an accommodation for that type of child. But yeah, these are questions that I've gotten when we were in the classroom from students. So these are actually really good student generated questions. Okay. All right, moving on. If we go to example 2, it says the president of a university sends an online survey to all faculty members requesting feedback about satisfaction levels with university departments, service, and benefits offered. How might the results of this survey be biased? All right. First of all, I just want to remind you guys, if you're writing on a separate sheet of paper, just make sure that you're writing on your piece of paper that this is section 153. I'd write the date, and then I would write for each example. If you don't want to write all of this out, just write example 2, and then take your notes for that example. Okay, so if you need to go back and reread the question. Okay. Biased means that it means in favor, or it means favoring. So I would write this note down. Bias means favoring something. Okay. So the president of a university sends an online survey to all faculty members requesting feedback about satisfaction levels with university departments, service, and benefits offered. How might the results of this survey be biased? Meaning, how could it be favoring? And these are examples. So surveys that are online typically have a lower, and this is not something you guys should know, but this is what I'm telling you. I didn't know this until I actually read this response out of the book. Surveys that are online typically have a lower response rate, which means part of the population will not be represented. If part of the population is not represented, it's biased because you're not representing everybody. Okay. Another thing, online means that the president may be able to see who answers and how. So anytime that you have something online, instead of like writing it down on a piece of paper and then like handing it in without your name on it, there's a possibility that that technology could generate like the email address associated with it or the name associated with it, which means people are going to answer in a way that might not be honest because they don't want to tell their boss something bad and then that reflect negatively on their job and then they get fired or not get a promotion. So online means that the president may be able to see who answers it and how. That means that answers may not be honest if they are worried about who sees them. It might they might fear retaliation of negative or honest answers. Meaning if they answer honestly and it's a negative response, they might worry about being fired or passed over for a promotion or something like that. Okay, and then that's it for example 2. Example 3 says a group of newly hired campus safety officers boast that that there have been 30 fewer reported incidents since the officers were hired. What questions might you have about this result? Sorry, just want to see where we're at. Okay, so again, when you read something like this where it says that they're boasting that they have 30 fewer reported incidences since the officers were hired, you don't want to read it and think that that's inaccurate, that they're reporting something that's not true. Like maybe there's only 10, but they said 30 and they're exaggerating. So that's not really the direction that you want to go when you question statistics, but you want to go in a direction where you question that 30. Okay, it's not necessarily that it's wrong or that they shouldn't be boasting, but there's certain questions that you'd want to ask. For instance, did enrollment go down? So if the campus had less enrollment, then obviously with that enrollment going down, there should be less incidences happening. Okay. Or something you could say is it summertime? Because if it's summertime, there's far fewer students on campus, which means there should be far less incidences happening. Okay. Um, has there been other safety additions? Meaning, not only have they hired new campus security, but I know when I was on campus at college, they had like in the parking lots, they always, or around the campus, they always had like these blue towers where if something was happening, somebody could hit the button and it sent off a siren so that the campus security would be alerted immediately. Which if that happens, I would think an incident that's going on would stop, or people would be less likely to do something they shouldn't be doing because right away there's feedback that something's going wrong. Okay, and make sure you guys are writing these down. Feel free to pause and think about maybe what you would say, and then if maybe then that's talked about in here. And these are not the only answers. These are just, again, student generated from last year. Is this going on during the summer? So I already talked about that one. Is this being reported to make them look better? Meaning, I'm trying to think what that was. Can't remember why a student brought that up. Meaning like, are they trying to boast that this is, oh, there we go, I had reasons. Are they leaving out reports? Meaning like minor reports, maybe they're not counting because they're like, oh, well, that was just like a student was just wrong, or in a minute or two, it was dropped or something like that. So are they leaving out reports? Are students intimidated by them? Meaning, let's say they're not very nice, or they're very forceful, or they're not really fixing the problem. So then students stop going to talk to them because nothing's happening anyways. In which case there's going to be fewer because less people are using them as a tool to actually help. Okay, and again, these are not the only ones. Feel free to add to this. Feel free to email me if you want to know if maybe your answer seems reasonable too. Okay. Okay, the last question says to review the following survey questions and determine if the questions are unbiased or if they might create a bias. Something that is unbiased means that it is neutral, meaning that it's asked in a way that is not forcing you into thinking a specific way. Okay, like if somebody were to say, don't you think it's really warm outside today? That's not a neutral question because in the question it's asking you how to think. A neutral way to ask that would be, what do you think about the weather today? Okay. Or if the question creates a bias. So if a question is asked in a way that creates a bias, it means that it's favoring one over another. So favoring one over another. And these are definitions that you guys should be writing down. So this is a big objective of this unit, is to understand this idea of unbiased versus a question that creates bias. Okay, creating bias would be that question of, don't you think it's warm today? Okay, in the question it's telling you how to think. All right, so we're just going to read through these questions and determine if they seem like they are neutral questions where the reader would be able to answer in whatever way they think, or if it's leaning them towards an answer. Okay. So question A says, given America's great tradition of promoting democracy, do you think that we should intervene in other countries? Okay, so I'd pause for a second, reread it, see if you can come up with the answer, biased or unbiased. All right. So this part right here is actually what's going to tell you what kind of question this is. It says, given America's great tradition of promoting democracy. This is a leading phrase. This means that this question is a biased question. So the way that it is asked is making you think a specific way. It's telling you that America has a great tradition of promoting democracy. If we wanted it to be unbiased, we would have just said, do you think America should intervene in other countries? Okay. The next question, should all high school students be required to apply to college? What do you think that would be? Do you think it's a neutral question, or do you think it's creating bias? Should all high school students be required to apply to college? That is a neutral question, so that is unbiased. Okay. Nowhere in here is there a leading phrase. Nowhere in here is it making you think one way or another. It's just asking you. It doesn't say like, if students graduate high school, don't you think that they should apply to college? Or don't you think that all students should apply to college? That would be a leading question. Okay. The next question. Since there has been an increase in pedestrian injuries in this intersection, should we have crosswalks painted onto the streets? So pause for a second, see what you think. All right, so this question, the way that it's worded, kind of makes you feel like if you didn't think that crosswalks painted on, if where it says, should we have crosswalks painted onto the streets, it kind of makes you feel like if you didn't say yes, you kind of feel like a mean person, or you don't feel so very nice, because it's saying since there has been an increase in pedestrian injuries. So it's like, well, if there's an increase in pedestrian injuries and painting crosswalks onto the street would help that, then yeah, of course I want them to be painted. So this is creating a bias. So this is a bias question. Okay, again, because it's giving you information and then asking a question. If it just said, should we have crosswalks painted onto streets, and it didn't tell you why, then it's like, all right, well, it's just a neutral question. But because it's giving you information that there's an increase in pedestrian injuries, and then it's asking the question, it's biased. All right, last question. Maybe pause, read it, see what you think, and then unpause and listen to me. So this is a little bit different question. It says, should restaurants be required to include ingredients and calorie counts on their menus for food and beverage items, for just the food items, for just the beverages, or for neither? In general, when you read this question, it feels like it's an unbiased question. They're not leaning you towards anything. They're not trying to sway your opinion. Um, it's very neutral in nature. However, it actually isn't. It actually is a biased question, and this is why. It's biased because there are multiple questions. So it says, should restaurants be required to include ingredients and calorie counts on their menus for food and beverage items? If it stopped there, it would have been unbiased. But then it says for just their food items, for just their beverages, or for neither. So it's like you don't really know what question you're asking or answering. Like if you were to say yes, which part? Are you answering this part? Are you answering this part? Are you answering this part? So the question, because of how it's written, it's confusing. There's too much going on, which, because it's confusing, means that it's actually going to create a bias. Anytime you create a question where people don't know what the question was or they're confused by it, is creating bias, because people are answering, they don't actually know what they're answering. Okay, so hopefully that should give you a good idea of bias versus unbiased. We're going to skip this PBT. Your homework is going to be numbers 1 through 10. It's going to walk you through in the first couple, just a couple, like the warm up where it talks about percentages. And then it's going to talk about problems like example 1, 2, and 3. Okay. And then it's going to get to the point where it talks about bias versus unbiased, I think. Maybe not. I thought it did. Maybe not. But we will talk a lot about bias versus unbiased. I wanted to show you guys when you are in, let's see, where was I at? When you are in this calendar, again, click the homework. I want to show you the answer key at this point. So notice that this is section 153. So when I click on this answer key, I notice right here it says practice. I need to find practice 153. So I actually have to scroll down, scroll down. I can see this is 144. We're jumping all over the place in this unit. And I can see this is 151. Right here is practice 153. You can see that it goes to questions 1 through 4, and then when we get to the next page, it continues with 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These are long explanations. Your explanations don't necessarily need to be this long, but when you're asked about your opinion in questions and creating questions, you can't have like a yes no answer. Okay, so like you don't necessarily need something as big as this, but you definitely want to read through these answers and make sure that yours is pretty close in line to it, and also that it makes sense. A lot of these problems you might not know the answer until you read it and then go, oh, okay, that makes sense. And now you know for the next time you're asked that question, when it comes up to the test, it's like, oh, okay, I remember being told this. Okay, we will eventually get to some algebra and some numbers, just not there yet. But next week, I think we might start to get into that. Oops. All right. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Remember that the retake, I sent you an email about it, will be next Monday if you're in periods 1 and 7. And Tuesday if you're in period 8. Just like before, you will be emailed a code at the start of your period. It's optional. You do not need to do it. You should take advantage of it because you're really never offered that opportunity. I will average your 2 scores. If you got an I before because you scored less than a 60%, you should absolutely do the retake. I don't know if the district has decided what's going to happen if you end with an I in the grade book at the end of the semester. So better to be safe than sorry. I would try not to get any I's. Okay. Email me if you guys have any questions. Have a nice day.